With me on Brief Encounters today is Jake Jones, co-founder and CPO at Flank. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Excited to talk a little bit today about what's happening in legal automation, but just tell us first a little bit about the company you founded.
Yeah, it's quite a long story, some of which you already know, no doubt. You will know us from a previous lifetime as LegalOS, which we founded in 2018. The initial premise was we wanted to solve a very particular problem, which is that legal services and consumers are a long way away from each other, and there's a bottleneck between them, largely because legal services take a lot of effort and a lot of human effort to be in the loop to deliver. So we initially were selling to law firms with the intention of empowering law firms to deliver better, cheaper, faster legal services to consumers. But what we learned was maybe law firms don't necessarily want to do that. Maybe the incentives don't align due to the billable hour. And this led to us to pivot in-house and instead to be solving the problem where the legal service provider is the in-house legal team. So the teams you're very familiar with at Juro, and the consumer of the legal service are the business teams. So in particular, the problem space that we set to solve when we pivoted in-house was the weighting on legal of commercial teams. And an example would be the hours or days they need to wait for an NDA, the feedback on negotiation support, the completion of an InfoSec form questionnaire. So in trying to solve this problem space, we founded Flank. And really for about a year in trying to solve this problem, we were unable to because the technology wasn't there. And then ChatGPT 3.5 came along, a whole new way to interface with technology. And it allowed us to begin to build AI agents, which is what we do today. So our product are AI agents for legal, compliance, privacy, InfoSec teams, and they deploy them directly to commercial teams. The agents autonomously resolve requests at the point of origin. And that is basically the story of Flank.
Well, and it's an awesome story, and one we followed for a while because we were founded around the same time, and tackling related but not the same challenges. It's really interesting. I mean, thinking back to those days, there was so much low-hanging fruit. I mean, the level of automation was so low that sort of anything you automated, integrating with Salesforce was considered sort of a mind-blowing thing. Digitization of documents that were in paper format. I mean, it was kind of crazy. But for you guys, there was a kind of specific pivot moment, and you mentioned kind of ChatGPT coming out. But what was it in your mind that kind of crystallized that actually what you wanted to do, which hadn't been possible, was now going to be possible?
So we spent a lot of 2022 trying to build a product that legal teams could deploy to commercial teams for them to self-serve some of the real legal thinking. So rather than just self-serving like getting an NDA, it would be self-serving the answer to a complex negotiation question. Someone's pushing back on clause 5.4. The someone is a blue chip customer and the deal size is 150K. What should I do in this very specific scenario? But the interfaces we were able to build for commercial teams were never adopted by commercial teams because commercial teams don't like to adopt new products, and you might have had to take on this challenge yourself.
Was this in UI, so in your own interface, or was this in kind of integrated system?
But this time it was through our own UI.
Yeah.
We integrated into Salesforce as well, but the adoption rate was so low from the end user that eventually it was the legal teams putting their hands up going, it's great, we want to solve this problem, but it's not been adopted. And as soon as ChatGPT was released, what we saw was not an amazing technical innovation in terms of what AI could do behind the scenes. The amazing innovation to us was this is a new way of interacting with software that fits into how salespeople interact with legal. They're emailing legal, they're Slacking legal, they're MS Teamsing legal, they're sometimes WhatsApping legal, and now legal can put something in between them and this crazy traffic. So that was the big shift. And as soon as we saw that, what we thought was, well, it might not be today, it might not be in 12 months, But at some point in the next few years, all of this work that currently is done by people to resolve this bottleneck between commercial teams and legal teams will be done by AI. So why don't we just start building now and see how far we get?
And how did it feel at the time? Because you had obviously spent multiple years building the first iteration, and this, it felt like an evolution, but it really a pivot in what you were doing. I mean, just take us back to that mindset and how it felt to go and take that risk of kind of building a second company within a company.
Yeah, to be clear, it definitely was a pivot. It wasn't an evolution. It was 2 steps back in a sense. And at the time, it was pretty tough. It was very exciting, but it was tough to acknowledge that everything we built had to go, that there was a new paradigm, and that we had to grab that paradigm as quickly as possible. But then the excitement takes over, because then we're in a position in November 2022 where the API still is not released until I think March. So we have 3 or 4 months where we're building a product without an API. We don't even know if an API is coming, and we have to navigate that.
And it's challenging, and interesting how you think about categories as well, because there was a time where you could neatly put legal tech in categories. You'd have e-signature and CLM and matter management, and we always kind of struggled with this because there was an element of self-serve in Juro, and we've always had native e-signature, which was kind of unusual for a CLM, and so we've always kind of thought a bit hard about these categories. But it seems there's a kind of convergence happening. Like where do you feel you fit into the kind of the traditional categorization, if at all?
So the way I think about categories maybe is a little bit similar to how you're thinking about categories, because I'm looking at who are we solving the problem for and what's the exact problem we're solving, and that's the category. And it then doesn't matter what the solution looks like, and a category might end up being composed of multiple point solutions. And I think what I'm seeing, because with AI you can solve so many problems with a single product because it's so quick to spin up new tools, I basically see 2 major new categories emerging, one that is already pretty full of incumbents, and that is copilots and autopilots. And copilots are tools that are primarily used by lawyers to do the work that they're already doing, but do it faster and more efficiently, and maybe to also manage the work they're doing. So maybe it operates as a system of record. And I broadly include CLMs in that for now, although it remains to be seen where that goes. And then the other category is frontline agents. It's the problem being solved is not me as a lawyer needing a support to do my job. It's me as a lawyer not wanting to do a proportion of the work and needing to outsource that. And maybe previously I've outsourced that to a deal desk or a paralegal, or I've allowed myself just not to review NDAs, as an example. And now I actually am able to solve that problem by outsourcing it to an agent.
Interesting. And this was obviously a big narrative now, which is the difference between, as you put it, copilot and autopilot is basically down to the level of automation of the task and the trust to which a legal function will give autonomy to the business. And I think that's where some of the DNAs between Juro and Flank is similar, which is we've always tried to believe that legal will enable folks in the business to self-serve on tasks. Of course, those have been quite limited tasks. But where does that go? I mean, I think today in Flank you can get markups of documents, you can get answers to really complex questions. What's the sort of the limiting factor on what the business can actually self-serve on versus the legal team doing the work?
Yeah, I think this is a walking question. I don't think we know yet. And there's going to be a degree to which it's a question of what's the appetite for legal teams to automate work away. What is the work they actually do want to automate away? Clearly, I mean, we see from the adoption of CLMs with the automation of terms based on templates and the automation of NDAs and everything else that goes through a CLM and how successful that is, that kind of work certainly is going to be automated away fully. The other limiting factor is the intelligence of the large language models. How intelligent do they get? And then the big question, how deterministic can they be? Because the architecture is probabilistic and lawyers are not going to be a big fan of rolling a dice with every deal they do. So the question then for the builders is, One, how intelligent is the AI and can it be manipulated to be deterministic? Two, the applications we're building, can we kind of tame the LLM to be much more deterministic than is in its nature?
And let's go a bit deep into the tech, because it's funny. Like there's a lot written about on things like legal specific LLMs. We've never gone down that route, right? So we're using APIs of open source LLMs built into our stack in different ways. But there's a lot of writing about, need a legal specific LLM, and this can be better or faster or more accurate. Just kind of curious, like how you've approached that and whether you think that is a kind of a competitive advantage, competitive front.
I mean, there's a couple of points to this. The first being, let's take a task that a lawyer is doing that they want to outsource to an agent. How much of that is actually legal specific work? How much knowledge of the law and of legal logic does a lawyer leverage when they're doing that task? And that's an open question. I would argue sometimes, and for some of the tasks, very little to none.
Yes.
And most of these tasks have multiple steps. So even if there is part of it that requires legal logic, it's probably only part of it. In which case you'd want general LLMs that are better at just, for example, understanding what it's looking at rather than in a legal context. But the other thing right today with legal LLMs, or domain-specific LLMs of any sort, is that the foundation models are evolving a lot, or foundation models are evolving very, very quickly. And from what I've seen so far in the market, as soon as there's a domain-specific LLM, it gets outstripped in performance weeks later by a foundation model. But it's expensive to train a legal-specific LLM. You need lots of data.
Very, right?
Very expensive, and you need data scientists, and you need to curate the data, and you need to do all of this kind of stuff. Maybe that step of training will be more commoditized over time, so training will become easier. Or maybe someone like Thomson Reuters, who I know are working on their own domain-specific LLMs, will be able to do something with the massive amount of data they have that becomes really useful for people like Flank and Juro, who are building applications to leverage those legal-specific LLMs. But for today, there's not an advantage using a domain-specific LLM over GPT-4, for example.
And it's interesting as well. I mean, I wholly aligned on the TR piece as well. There's owners of legal content. There is, excuse me, something interesting about it. What are the other kind of failure points you see in the market? I mean, obviously, every team in legal tech is kind of working on this stuff, but where do you see the kind of the common pitfalls from a product perspective, and as a kind of product leader?
I think one of the biggest pitfalls I observe, I don't have a lot of data to go on for this particular pitfall, but is this excitement and idea that we can build software that is leveraging LLMs, we can build new software and new tools in days that will work robustly. My feeling is that is not accurate, that you can get 80% of the way there in a couple of days, but then it requires the same kind of product work that we saw in the previous paradigm, where you need to spend a lot of time with your customers, tweaking it, tinkering it, and actually this long tail work is what is the difference between an immature product that doesn't have product market fit and a mature product that you can deploy at scale. And the second major pitfall is thinking that retrieval augmented generation works. It doesn't work. It's a bit of a party trick, and you can get some value from it for sure, but it is highly inaccurate. And the problem is not the limitation of the LLMs. The LLMs get smarter and smarter and smarter, and all of those downstream steps in a RAG orchestration get better and better. But vector databases and vector retrieval is really poor. So even if you augment this with knowledge graphs, even if you do a lot of other clever stuff, you're going to get a pretty probabilistic, is a nice way of calling a RAG system. Inaccurate is a better way of putting it. So you have to find another way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It comes back to kind of focus, right? In many respects, it's the paradigm of how to think about products has not really changed, which is if you build a highly focused solution, you have a much better chance of actually building a comprehensive solution. I mean, you've worked obviously a lot with lawyers now as potential customers, and I'm always kind of curious about the perception of others to the psyche of a lawyer, because, we're painfully detail-minded, pick holes in stuff, world class at picking holes in things. And often, there can be quite a comprehensive mindset. So if you look at, Juro is kind of an intelligent contract automation platform. We have thousands of feature requests for every possible thing you can think of. And we say, thank you. We've got to focus on doing what we're good at. But lawyers have been great at picking up. So I'm just kind of curious how you found those early customers of the kind of the second coming of the company in Flank. How did you find these innovators, and what about them enabled them to take that risk on an earlier stage business doing something amazing?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because I think every company is so reliant upon early customers to take a gamble and to trust you, and for them also to want to bet on new technology. And it had very little to do with us and much more to do with people hearing what we're doing and wanting to be involved and wanting to solve that problem. We were very lucky that TravelPerk approached us in, I think, late 2022, and had seen some of our LinkedIn posts about the problem space we're solving and wanted to dig deeper. And then we went really deep with them once the ChatGPT was released and we pivoted into AI. And they're a very innovative legal team. Andy and Tom and the team there are very innovative, and they're always looking at how we leverage the latest technology and the latest methodologies and the latest way of thinking about legal ops in order to empower our commercial teams. They're always thinking about that. So they were pushing us to solve this problem for them. And I think what was key is that our first 4 or 5 customers were sold on the problem we wanted to solve being their biggest problem. So the bottleneck between commercial teams and legal teams. And then the product work becomes a lot more straightforward after that, because you're aligned on, okay, this is the problem we're solving. We're not solving this over here. We're not solving this thing over here. We're not building a tool for you to be better at whatever. We are trying to resolve this bottleneck, and we're measuring it in this particular way. And then it's very constructive from there. And then you have your roadmap to an extent, our roadmap to an extent, driven by trial and error of just trying to solve this particular problem collaboratively. Yeah.
It's amazing sort of time, isn't it, as well, when a lot of the orthodoxy in product would say, well, you shouldn't build for a handful of customers. You should, triangulate the feedback across. And actually, those early days, you just learn so much more from a handful of individuals and really go super deep into what they're doing. And it's really, the TravelPerk, I think Andy's our next guest on this podcast, so we hear more about it then. It was the same for us, right? In the early days, customers was like Deliveroo were again super forward-looking, had very specific problems around commercial contracts, whatever it was, and wanted to solve them. And they take a leap, and they get rewarded for it if it works. And the observation I had is, for all of those early adopters, they spend a lot of time. They spend not very much time thinking about the efficiency of the legal function. So everyone says, well, you can do everything 10% faster or 20% faster. And they actually spend all their time thinking about the end user of their service. So, what NPS score am I going to get from the sales team to reflect the service delivery? And I found that even back in 2017, it's fairly rare, right? But when you find those gems, the innovation is just so exciting.
I absolutely have had the same experience. That I don't want to say the best legal teams, but the legal teams most willing to adopt software early and who are looking to kind of innovate always are looking at how to improve the customer experience of their internal customers, which is a terminology I'd never heard before speaking to Andy Cook from TravelBug. I'd never heard the term internal customer. I was like, the first few times it threw me off because I'm like, they're not a customer, but they are. They're the consumer of the service you're providing is an in-house legal team. And that frame changes the legal team from being a provider of a service to being the provider of a product. And that's where then we come in as product partners, like both you and I. And that actually was the most enjoyable part of developing the product, is finding partners who had a product mindset, even though they're lawyers. So when you asked me that question before of what's it like working with lawyers, I think maybe I don't really know, because maybe the people who are adopting AI agents are not typical lawyers.
But the funny thing is that obviously it sounds like for you as well, we found a lot of those innovators in fast-scaling tech companies.
Yeah.
Very innovative. But actually, the curious thing is, as we've scaled, you find more and more gems who are in super traditional businesses, making tires or fire retardant clothing, or whatever it is. But they're out there and they're really frustrated and they're really curious about the problems that they have and want to solve them. But I think legal can learn a lot from product. It's the same in other functions. People and talent is drawing a lot of product thinking into how modern people and talent teams work, and it's just starting in legal, and it's really exciting. Let's talk a bit about agents. So I think before we started this chat, I told you we had lunch with 30 customers last week, and I asked for a show of hands of who knows what an AI agent is, and it was 3 out of 30. And our customers are very forward-looking, Lloyd, but that sort of level of knowledge is actually quite low generally. Tell us a little bit, like what is an agent, and why should people care?
So an agent, the distinction between the AI that people are using every day and are very familiar with, so tools like ChatGPT or the spellbooks of the world that are still AI-first solutions, but that are used by the expert themselves to be more efficient. The difference between that and an agent is autonomy. So there's many different ways of defining an agent, but for the purposes of this, let's define it through that one dimension of autonomy. And when you have an AI tool that's fully autonomous, so it can think for itself, it can plan for itself, it can receive a request from someone who's a non-expert, so in the case of a legal agent, a business user, a salesperson, and it can complete that request from end to end, fully autonomously without any engagement from the legal team. So it's actually, there are some existing self-serve systems that are agentic in nature. I would argue that existing features that maybe Jira had many years ago, where people are self-serving templates, that's somewhat agentic. I mean, you're using software without any interference from a legal person to do what previously a paralegal had to do. So this is a legal agent, and as we think about the future of legal agents, it will obviously, the definition will become increasingly advanced, and we'll begin to see autonomy and a wide range of capability. So that's the second dimension that I think is probably important to include when we think about agents, that it can't just do one very simple programmatic thing, but it actually can do a range of different tasks, that it becomes increasingly human-like in its ability and in its autonomy.
And that human side is so interesting because, when I was a trainee lawyer, we would do very similar tasks to that as a human, right? So you'd create a first draft of a contract, or you would review a stack of contracts to find key clauses, and then usually it would go to your supervisor, who would then kind of grade your homework and basically find points that you weren't able to spot. Now, we followed the logic, which says that increasingly agents will be able to autonomously conduct those human-like tasks. What does that mean for the role of the senior lawyers? Like, how does it, in your mind, change, what it means to be a lawyer and what they're going to do?
It's a really interesting emergent question. We don't know. And my prediction is that the more senior members of the team will be much more involved in defining strategically the governance guardrails, for example. So if we take an agent, obviously a legal agent needs to understand how it should act in different situations. Who's defining that? Obviously the senior lawyers are. At the moment, that this is very novel to them. This is new. They've never done this before. They've never had to set guardrails before. So they might upload a set of SOPs. They might upload previous set of contracts and say it should look like this. But my feeling is that the senior legal team will become better and better and better at leveraging agents to learn about where are we getting pushback on our terms? How should we therefore change our SOPs? Where should we refuse to negotiate entirely because it's just not worth our time and effort? How do I leverage the data that is being generated by the agent to, again, strategically guide what the agent should be doing? So essentially establishing the blueprint for the team, as in a sense they are kind of already doing, but it's different people executing on that, including themselves.
It's kind of like having your own team of agents, right? And this kind of leverage idea is quite interesting, where, as a lawyer, you're conducting individual tasks. As you become a manager of lawyers, you're then, delegating certain tasks for human beings. But it'd be interesting in, 5 years, whether you can have, a small legal team, but with massive leverage, running multiple agents, overseeing playbooks and having a high level of responsibility, but just without the headcount, which, probably you and I have seen in legal teams with our customers. It's quite hard to get new people in legal teams in 2024. It's very interesting. What worries you about it? I mean, we're talking about all the positives. What worries you?
What worries me about agents?
About the vast automation of legal work.
I don't know if it's necessarily limited to legal, my concern. But earlier today, so we were hosting an event for general counsels and legal ops professionals earlier as well today in London. And there was a question asked, which is, what do you enjoy most about the job? And there was a general consensus, I would say, that the human element and the communication with other teams across the organisation was one of the most important aspects and one of the most enjoyable aspects of the job. And I think protecting the human quality of legal services is important. I think that there's something, for example, in a negotiation, and this might be a really poor example, but there's something unquantifiable about a negotiation process. You're trying to find, how do I get my needs met and how do I get the other party's needs met? But there's something qualitative in that, and there's something kind of instinctual in that. It's not just, I need to make sure that I don't go over this limit and I need to make sure this person doesn't go over this limit. In some cases it is, and at scale, maybe with smaller deals that are less important, it is. But there's a human nuance that I don't think can be captured by, certainly today, by agents and certainly by logic. And we worked a lot with logic trees in the past. This was the kind of birth of the company, was logic trees and decision trees. And even though we were coming from Germany, where it's a very logical, more deterministic system, it couldn't capture that human nuance. And this is what I worry about with trying to automate away, especially negotiation, and then just the relationship to other teams. This technology should be improving the relationship between sales and legal, for example. It shouldn't be pushing them apart. And this is why I've referred to in the past self-serve tools, not all of them, but as being passive aggressive, because it's saying, do it yourself. And I don't love that.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, we obviously think about the same thing in the context of integration. I think we're both integrated into Slack and, sort of CRM, Salesforce, and so on. And I do think there's a very careful framing that has to come from the legal team, which is, this is a system of enablement, and that there's a real win for the team. And I think one of the things that we've definitely found hard is, as lawyers, we often tend to be quite rules-based and top-down and prescriptive in the delivery of the service. So the lawyer's instinct, I'm just talking about myself, probably listeners horrified by this, talking about myself, is to say, announce to the business, there is a new contract automation platform, you shall use it. In order to use it, hit /0 in Slack. And you're kind of setting up the implementation for failure, which is, the question is ultimately, how does this help the end user to solve their problem? And there are kind of tactics and ways to do that, but it is, as you say, very dependent on the human aspect and the understanding and the empathy, which again, it's hard to kind of recreate, at least at the moment in 2024. Let's talk a bit about adoption. So you've got these amazing early adopter customers who've kind of screamed ahead. What do you foresee to be the challenges as you scale into kind of large enterprises? What are the adoption challenges for Flank?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just large enterprises. I think already, but I will touch upon large enterprises in a moment, but I think already there are adoption challenges in the understanding of what's possible with the technology, in maintenance of the technology. This is an adoption challenge that needs to be owned by the product builders. So in our case, just as an example, in our case, and perhaps Jira has a similar challenge with templating, but if someone is deploying a tool that's based on a certain playbook today, what happens when that playbook changes? Are we now, by introducing Flank as a tool to the organization, are we now giving the team more work? Oh, now they've got to maintain a playbook here. They have to maintain documentation in another place when they're already maintaining it in Vanta and they're already maintaining it in Notion. So that we obviously cannot push that to the customer. We have to find clever, innovative ways of maintaining automatically, leveraging AI. How can it learn as it goes, for example? That's an adoption challenge. But looking at big enterprises is a very different game. We're just experiencing this now. So we closed our first 2 enterprise customers within the last few months, and we've been onboarding them. I'm taking a breath to really think about what some of the biggest challenges are. But with AI in particular, any enterprise you go into, any organization you go into, especially technology organizations, they're going to have a wealth of AI tools and or pilots underway already, maybe doing similar stuff, maybe doing adjacent stuff, and they might also have their own internal projects already underway. So if you're trying to go in to sell AI to an enterprise, the first thing that we experienced is, thanks but no thanks, we've got this handled. We're building our own stuff.
Yeah.
And not built here syndrome is a very real thing.
Yeah.
So going in and trying to tell an enterprise who have incredibly smart engineering teams of their own that you know better and that your tool is better than anything they could build internally is a challenge, especially when you see large enterprises who are advertising the amazing efficiency gains they've made. You probably know who I'm talking about, but the massive efficiency gains they've made recently by building their own internal tools.
Yes.
So this is something we came up against. And the key for overcoming these adoption challenges, and this is not so much, it's also kind of a sales challenge.
Sure, yeah.
But it's a pre and post sales challenge. You're continually convincing teams of what they can do with your software. And the approach that we've taken to this is to ensure that we're solving novel problems for them, that we're not trying to solve problems that they're either already in the process of trying to solve themselves or have already got sorted or never really thought about, but rather we do the discovery. We understand what is the problem you're trying to solve, because whether it's enterprise, whether it's a smaller company, if there's a real problem there that's creating pain and that's impacting revenue, then they're going to have a lot of patience for you solving it with them, and they're going to be pretty pushy in adopting that software.
It's so interesting. I mean, Jira's a mid-market focused tool, so we don't see this so often, but we do have a similar experience around the clarity of pain points. And often in a mid-market company, you get it bottoms up because the pain is so obvious. We are answering 500 requests a month to the sales team on simple repetitive questions, or we've got 5,000 contracts and we don't know what they say, or whatever it may be. And so you have kind of a critical understanding of the problem space, often from the first call. It's often like you see the pain in the eyes of the prospect. And enterprise is obviously much more complex, and there are more stakeholders. And we've often seen that more top down, which is the CEO has said, do AI. Next executive down has said, got to do AI. Next person down has gone, but what AI shall we do? The sort of the solution in search of a problem. And sometimes it works, but as a vendor, it sounds like we have the same challenge. You have to spend a lot of time trying to uncover whether there is truly a problem which has a perfect match with your solution, because maybe you close the deal to hit someone's internal AI target, but so what? A year later, if no one uses it, there's no retention. And this is something we hear more and more. Before we wrap up, Jake, tell us, if you were leading an in-house legal function in 2024, 2025, what kind of challenges would you be thinking about, and what kind of technologies would you be looking into?
So I would want to find the problems that are entirely solvable by AI now. I'd want to find the problems that I can entirely outsource to AI, because it's a little bit like cleaning a bedroom, and there's certain clutter that prevents you from actually understanding where you need to clean the tool. First put your clothes in the drawer, and then you can see the wood for the trees, right? To not mix the metaphors too much. So the first thing I do is go, okay, what can I automate right now? And that includes fairly basic stuff like some of the automation that Juro would offer. So automating away templating. I think in 2024, there should not be any kind of document that is not being automated. So automate away documents, hand that over to AI. I would automate the high volume work that is taxing but not complex. So I'd automate away high volume queries. That can be handled now by AI. Automate it away entirely. What I would not do, which is as important as what I would do, is to try and use AI to help me tackle some of the more complex work, because AI is going to get progressively better over time. So the approach I would take is to almost have a roadmap of the pain points that I have, the work that I have on a daily basis, the kinds of tickets that land on my desk on a daily basis. And I would grade them from lowest complexity to highest. And that's my roadmap. And I start with the lowest and see where AI today gets me. And as soon as I reach a point where the AI starts to falter a little bit and I lose confidence in the AI, I stop, I wait for the next foundation model, or I wait for the next flank to come along and solve that in a way that I can trust. So in terms of what I would automate away, that's how I think about it. And then I would ensure that I really fully understand what is already possible with AI. Because I think you mentioned that 3 out of 30 is 10% of relatively forward-thinking general counsels, legal professionals, were not aware of AI agents. We had a similar situation in TechGC in, I think it was in Houston, about 6 months ago, where one of our customers was there, and they asked how many people in the room have adopted generative AI out of a room of 100 people. Again, the number was 3, so this is even smaller. 3% of people put their hands up and said, we're using AI in our day-to-day work. And when we speak to these people who are not using generative AI in their day-to-day work, more often than not, they're astonished at what's possible, because they looked at something 6 months ago, or they looked at something a year ago, and they maybe didn't appreciate the rate of change. And what O1 that was released a month ago,
It was kind of mind-blowing.
is, depending on how you prompt, if you're very good at prompting, then the gap's not so big. But if you were not really doing prompt engineering before, the gap between O1 and the first version of, let's say, 4.0, which only came out a few months ago, I think it was May, is astonishing. It's enormous. And now with O1, you can do document review of relatively complex contracts. You can do that review with minimal prompting. With 4.0, review requires a huge amount of prompt engineering. So understanding exactly what is already possible and trying to stay on top of that. which is no easy task.
And it's such a refreshing message because we often have customers and prospects who are spending a lot of time actually kind of looking into the foundational technology, but not necessarily using it. So it's kind of like you want to make some toast and you're reading the instruction manual of how the toaster works and the sort of amps going through it. At the end of the day, you put in bread and you try it, and it's pretty obvious how it works when you try it. And it's also, I think, cool because you're a chief product officer, and in the end, we're all product people in this world. We come back to the absolute fundamentals. What are the jobs we have to do day to day? Which are the ones which are repetitive and painful? And then, once we're kind of clear on that, to look into what's possible in the solution space and try it. And often when you try it, something like an agent, once you see it, you kind of know what it is actually. You don't have to read a paper from Harvard or Stanford, you just know it.
That is very true. And the more hands-on you get with this kind of technology, the better representation of what AI can do you're getting. And the application builders, the AI companies building on the application layer, the startups, in a way understand AI better than anyone because they're having to make it do stuff in the real world.
Jake, thank you so much for being on Brief Encounters. Where can folks find out more about Flank?
So getflank.ai. Very soon it will be flank.ai.
Remember that magic moment for Jiro.
We're super excited to have got on flank.ai. And then also, I think I'm all over LinkedIn. Now I like to share our progress. I like to build in public and to share my thoughts on AI on LinkedIn as well. So you can find me, Jake Jones, on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much, Jake.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Richard.